coming out of New Orleans. This is the mother of all storms. This is the storm of the century.
As I sat on the levee, I reflected as one by one our hedge of protection was removed until the floodwaters eventually overtook and destroyed our city. As I pondered on these events, I couldn't help but to wonder if there wasn't another storm of enormous magnitude that was approaching our nation. A storm that couldn't be measured by the human eye, by barometric pressures, by colliding fronts, or even in a Richter scale, but is measured by the sins of its people. And I had to wonder and ask myself, is that a storm approaching this nation today? This story is about that approaching storm and the concerns for this great nation, America as we know it. Is that we know that when the season comes, God says we don't know the day, we don't know the hour, we don't know the moment, but we know the season.
Yeah, he rebuked the Pharisees for not understanding the signs of the times.
If the blood moon's are relevant and the Shemitah is relevant, then there is a likelihood that you're going to have a major episode happen in the Middle East. It can't go much longer. It's like a pressure cooker that's about to burst in the Middle East.
I believe a great shaking is coming to this land, coming to America, coming to the world. It will involve the collapse of the financial realm, the economic realm, and will be greater than that. And will change things, even change the course of history.
We're not just talking about just religion. We're talking about events that are going to shape this entire world. Mm-hmm. Every man, woman, and child.
They're saying all the danger signs that were there at the last crash are there now.
When we talk about Bible prophecies, 2015 may be a year where we see the literal fulfillment of a Bible prophecy. We don't know this for sure, but these guys are pointing to some very big warnings right here.
From a prophetic standpoint, we're very close.
And your timeline here, I'll be shocked if we don't see the fulfillment of 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 different Bible prophecies. And we've only talked about a couple of.
There's the potential we could see the beginning of the tribulation occurring, but I don't know. We'll have to watch it and see.
But the warning is, Shemitah in Hebrew can mean the release, but it can also mean the collapse or the fall. And so the warning is that if America does not return to God, America is rapidly departing from God and driving him out and defying his ways. If America doesn't return to God, that its crown as the head of nations, the American age as we've all known it, will collapse. And it's even beginning to collapse even this year.
By far the most important thing today, not only today, but in a historical perspective, the most important thing is to make sure that a militant regime, a militant Islamic regime or a militant Islamic movement does not get its hands on the weapons of mass destruction.
Missiles cloud Mideast skies over the Persian Gulf. Iran shuts down the Strait of Hormuz. Arab oil is choked off to world markets. Hezbollah and Hamas launch scores of missiles into Israel. Terror cells initiate cycles of violence in America. About 2,600 years ago, the Hebrew prophets Jeremiah and Ezekiel issued parallel end times prophecies concerning modern-day Iran. Today, the rogue country is becoming a nuclear nation and aggressively advancing its hegemony throughout the greater Middle East. Nuclear Showdown in Iran, revealing the ancient prophecy of Elam, is a non-fiction thriller taking the reader on a journey of discovery through the eyes of the prophets and the minds of today's key national players. But there's a backstory. an even bigger story. It's a spiritual showdown in Iran between Islam and Christianity.
Iran is being transformed into a Christian nation in this generation. Iran has the fastest growing evangelical population in the world. Iranians are experiencing miracles, healings, visions, and dreams. And with the help of satellite television, millions of them are coming to Christ. 2 years ago, Iranian government began cracking down on Christianity. But it's not working. Christianity is growing in Iran. Iran is in the Bible prophecy, and many Iranian Christians are excited about what the Bible says about the future of Iran. Please pray for your brothers and sisters in Iran.
Pick up your copy of Nuclear Showdown in Iran, revealing the ancient prophecy of Elam.
Wow. I tell you what, that's amazing. I don't think I need to make any introduction to our last speaker tonight. Bill Salus, would you like to come on up and explain what was shown just now? Thank you. Let's welcome Bill.
Thanks, MK. Well, it's great to be with you this evening for this Saturday main presentation at 7 o'clock. Prophecy of the News saved the best for last. I'm talking about Greg Fraser's closing comments, of course. I don't know where I'm going to put my little water. I'm sure I'll spill it somewhere. Is this thing on? Well, I mean, this thing's on. Is this thing on? What? Thank you. Okay. Go ahead, say a word. Okay, it's great to be here. Got up this morning, wanted to spend a little time with God in this beautiful place, walked around outside the facilities, and I couldn't help but notice that the parking lot was filled with cars from different states. People have come from all over the country, and I'm really excited that you've come here. There's even people here from Hawaii, and I came from California, and I also live in Oregon, so I came from Oregon, actually. And so you're the people who want to get the biblical perspective of what's unraveling in the world right now. You're not comfortable with just the information you're getting on Fox and CNN and that sort of thing, the political pundits and military analysts. And why not? Why not find out what the Bible has to say about these days? And since I've got before me great Bible prophecy teachers, studious Bible prophecy buffs, I've got a question you might be able to help me with. I've been thinking about this lately. When the Bible talks about the final trump, is that referring to Donald Trump? I mean, I don't know. Some wife's nudging her husband. You brought me into this thing. He didn't even know. He thinks Donald Trump's in Bible prophecy. But Colorado is so beautiful. It's my third time here. This is the third conference they've had. And I was disappointed when Colorado legalized marijuana and approved same-sex marriages. And then I really got upset when I heard someone trying to say that that was biblical, because in the book of Leviticus it says, if a man sleeps with another man, he must be stoned. You guys didn't think I was going to talk about prophecy tonight, did you? Okay. Well, I'm going to talk about the futures of Israel, Islam, and America. Who's concerned about the future of America? Rightfully so. It's actually an abbreviated title for there's coming a greater, safer Israel, according to the scriptures, and that's going to spell disaster for Islam, and it appears that that's going to be problematic for America. So I'm going to break this down into three sections: Israel, Islam, and America as I conclude. Now, how many of you were in the Aspen room yesterday when I spoke about preparing for the coming prophecies? Okay, quite a few, and quite a few weren't. So I'm going to ask those of you that were there to indulge me as I go through a few slides that are germane to my presentation tonight. There'll be a little bit of review for you, but for those that weren't there, it's important for them to see this. In that talk, I outlined where we are specifically on the prophetic timeline as best we can tell. And isn't that what's most important, right? I mean, certainly there's things that happen after these events I've got here. The rebirth of Israel, a marquee event that happened in 1948. And we're marching rapidly towards this Ezekiel 38 Gog of Magog invasion. And I think if the Lord were to tarry, that the events I'm going to talk to you about here are pre-tribulation events, as I believe the rapture is also a pre-trib event. I'm certainly concerned about what's after the Ezekiel 38 invasion, you know, the Antichrist, the harlot world religion. I talked about these things at the banquet. But I'm mostly concerned about what's going to happen probably in the nearest of futures. So we're going to try to identify where we're at on the timeline so that we can know what to be bracing for. I sincerely think that we might see the literal fulfillment of a Bible prophecy in the not-too-distant future. How many of you think that Israel is a miracle of God in fulfillment of Bible prophecy? It's not a mistake or a moral obligation of the United Nations? A lot of hands go up at this conference, but I speak at some other churches, and not a lot of hands go up. You might be surprised. They're just not being taught of the relevance of Israel today, the centerpiece of God's end times plan. And I could get into all the prophecies that have been fulfilled and are being fulfilled with Israel coming into the land, but I'm going to get some of the slides that I show you will evidence that Israel is extremely relevant. So when Israel was birthed in 1948, the world hourglass tipped its final turn. And folks, I'm here to let you know, the earth that we live in has an expiration date, and it's coming pretty soon. The end times, the time of the end, is the central theme of the Bible. The latter days, the last days. Why is Ezekiel 38 so important? You know, it's 52 verses in Ezekiel 38 and 39 of some of the most descriptive Bible prophecies you'll find in the Bible. And I think God intended it that way because it's the marquee event that he's going to put the world on official notice that he's the covenant-keeping, promise-keeping God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who sent Jesus Christ to die for our sins that none should perish but have everlasting life. And he tells us this in Ezekiel 39:7. Now, to build up to Ezekiel 39:7, we find out that there's going to be this massive invasion. I'm going to spend a moment on talking about Ezekiel 38 for you, tell you why I think it's near. This massive invasion, spearheaded by Russia, with Iran and Turkey and 9 members altogether, they're going to advance against Israel, and America's not going to stop them, and the Israeli Defense Forces is not going to stop them, but the Lord is going to stop them with hailstone, fire and brimstone. There's going to be an earthquake. And it's going to be really quite evident that it was God who stopped that most massive, armed and dangerous Mideast invasion of all time. And then in the aftermath, he's going to be able to say, so I will make my holy name known in the midst of my people Israel, and I will not let them profane my holy name anymore. Then the nation shall know that I am the Lord, the Holy One in Israel. Okay, now one of the reasons I would not, I've got many reasons why I put this as a pre-trib event. One of them is why I wouldn't put them into Armageddon, in the Ezekiel 38 invasion into Armageddon, as some people do, especially the people that espouse that there's some Muslim Antichrist coming, because they need all the wars to be in Armageddon, is why would God announce to the world that he's God when the Antichrist campaign of the mark of the beast is already in full swing, because Armageddon occurs at the very end of the tribulation. So he's got to give the world a choice before this crazy, deceiving Antichrist comes on the scene and tries to persuade people to buy into his lie. So this is where we're at on the timeline. We're somewhere between the rebirth of the nation of Israel and the Gog of Magog war, which is drawing very near for various reasons. For instance, Russia and Iran have never had better relationships in all of their history. Russia has helped Iran with their Bushehr nuclear reactor that's built over there. It's a nuclear disaster waiting to happen in the ancient territory of Elam. I'll be talking about that in just a moment. They've got contracts to build 2 or 3 more in that area. And also, Iran hates Israel. They want to wipe Israel off the map. Turkey, who's involved, is upset with Israel. Turkey's also got a contract with Russia now to build a nuclear power plant in Ankara. I think that's supposed to be done by 2020, if I'm not mistaken. And so for various reasons, I can go through a long list of them, but the point is, the Gog of Magog invasion is drawing very near, which means the Lord is going to uphold his holy name very soon. I think it's very near, but I don't think it's next, for various reasons I'll show you. But where are we now, 67 years later, since the rebirth of the nation Israel? I think we are really close to Ezekiel 38 and 39. I don't think God's going to wait a whole lot longer to allow the fireworks to start happening over in the Middle East. But the question is, what is in that gap there? Is it weeks, months, years? I don't think it's decades. And what happens in the middle? So how long is it? And is there anything that could happen between it, in between time? And so I'll give you another example, an image. When I do radio shows on this topic, since I don't have visuals, I will say take a 36-inch yardstick. For you seamstresses in there, I'm sure you've got one. And if the rebirth of Israel is on inch 1, and the Ezekiel 38 invasion is on inch 36, you move that marker all the way to up somewhere between inch 30 and inch 35 is probably where we're at, if that's another image for you. But why am I saying that it could be near but not next? Well, because I think certain things are going to have to happen between now and Ezekiel 38. And I'll give you the reason for that in a moment. And here's what I think those things are. And these are some of the slides I showed the group yesterday. You saw the trailer on nuclear showdown in Elam. And that is an ancient prophecy that was written by Jeremiah about 2,600 years ago, dealing with Iran, which is part of the area that hovers around the Persian Gulf. Now, Iran is Elam and Persia. Ezekiel wrote about Persia, and they're in Ezekiel 38, the Gog of Magog invasion. But Jeremiah wrote a distinctly different prophecy in Jeremiah chapter 49, which I believe is dealing with a nuclear scenario. And so in the book I've written out there, I point out why it's a pre-trib event, why it's not part of Ezekiel 38 and 39, and why it may be the very next event to happen on the prophetic timeline and lead to the other prophecies to follow. So what we have here in this prophecy is it tells us, Jeremiah tells us when he wrote it in 596 BC, that there was going to come a time that the Lord is going to be fiercely angry. He's going to be furious with Iran. And the reason he's furious with the details of the prophecy, we're told, is because there's bad leadership. There's a bad government in place at the time that the Lord's angry. Because it says he's going to destroy from there the kings and the princes. And you don't destroy good leadership, right? He would never have destroyed King Cyrus, who was a Persian king. He was an anointed king. Isaiah chapter 44, I think it was, in 45, even talk about Cyrus. He wouldn't do that. But why is he angry with them? Well, because they want to launch something powerful somewhere. The prophecy tells us that he's going to break the bow of Elam at the foremost of its might. They want to launch something, this bad leadership wants to launch something deadly somewhere. And of course, Iran's working on intercontinental ballistic missiles and a nuclear program, trying to get a nuclear weapon. I think it could be dealing with that because we're told that as this is, and it's told it's a huge disaster, it's an awesome disaster, that in the aftermath, the indigenous population, the Elamites in the area by the Bushehr nuclear reactor, where that is, which is built on 3 tectonic plates, highly seismic, in the aftermath, the indigenous population is going to flee. It says there will be no nations where the outcasts of Elam don't go. It's going to be a worldwide dispersion. Now, many of you are just probably for the first time being introduced to this prophecy because it's been vastly overlooked, but I think it's extremely relevant. It's only 6 verses, but it's extremely, extremely powerful. I'm watching for that to happen. And folks, with Russia about ready to send over the S-300 missile defense system and other things that are going on, Moshe Ya'alon, the defense minister of Israel, just quoted on August 7th to the Der Spiegel newspaper, which was picked up by the Times of Israel, that they are preparing or they are considering airstrikes on Iran's military sites. That was yesterday, I think, he said that. I think they've been considering it for quite some time, but for some reason he wants to vocalize that. What else? I think after the destruction, this disaster in Elam, this may happen. It may happen before, but it may happen as a result. When Iran gets struck, if there's a military strike, and folks, Israel will probably have to strike Iran. Most of the people I talk to that are in the know in Israel suggests the same thing. They're prepared to do to do that. They struck Syria's nuclear sites in September of 2007, and they struck Iraq's Osirak plant, I think it was 1980 or 1981. So they'll do what they have to do. But there's a prophecy in Isaiah 17 that talks about Syria and the destruction of its capital city, Damascus. It says, behold, Damascus will someday cease to be a city, it will be a ruinous heap. It's the oldest continuously inhabited city, dating back to the time of Abraham, about 4,000 years in recorded history. Now, that'll be a very powerful event, folks. And it says that in verse 9 of Isaiah 17 that the desolation is caused by the children of Israel, which would be the Israeli Defense Forces. And it says in verse 14 that at eventide you see Damascus, or it says you see him, meaning Damascus and the masculine pronoun, but in the morning he is no more. So it happens overnight at the cause of Israel. Israel has the ability to launch a nuclear weapon that bursts about 40 to 45 miles, if I understand this right, above a city, and it will take out the city but not go down and suck up all the particles into the radioactivity into the mushroom cloud. You'll still have the mushroom cloud, but you won't necessarily contaminate the whole environment because Israel's just across the border. So that's what I've heard. What else? There's this other prophecy, I'll spend a little bit of time on it tonight. Many of you are very familiar with it, called Psalm 83. Psalm 83 is an ancient prophecy written 3,000 years ago that I think is about to happen, and I think it has to happen so that Ezekiel 38 can happen and God can uphold his holy name. I'll explain why in a moment. Now you see an image up there with a map, and it's got a circle around it. I call this Confederacy, and they're entirely different than Ezekiel 38. And these are the countries. You see their ancient names up there, like Ammonites and Moabites and Edomites and gigabytes and megabytes, termites. But they're superimposed on their modern day equivalents. They share common borders with Israel, this confederacy. There's 10 members altogether. And we'll get into that in just a moment. And outside, of course, of them come the terrorist populations that exist. I'm watching for this too. Now, folks, we're talking about powerful, world-changing events. Iran's nuclear program, the destruction of Damascus, Psalm 83. Could these things be about to happen? And could they be about to happen in the very near future while we've got President Obama in charge, who's got some questionable foreign policy? I'm a little bit concerned personally if we were to, what would happen if there was an Elam prophecy, nuclear Iran, or destruction of Damascus, or an Arab-Israeli concluding war like Psalm 83. In his tenure, he's still got 2016 ahead, and he's beginning to look more and more. People are comparing him to Jimmy Carter, who, remember, in 1979 had an Iran hostage deal to deal with that he wasn't very effective with, where there were 52 hostages in captivity for 444 days. And so I'm a little concerned, and you might be too, that we might get something like this developing in that kind of a scenario. And it really worries me. I lose a lot of sleep. Now, I know that some of you think that that's a bad Photoshop image of Tiger Woods, but on a serious note, America, folks, we need to really ask ourselves, has God been giving prophetic warnings to this country? We've crossed a lot of dangerous biblical boundaries, and as I conclude, I'll share my concerns about that. And I believe we're going to see that America starts to decline and finds itself in the Ezekiel 38 prophecy in a less than superpower status. And what would get us from here, where we are today, into that position? And if we are in that position in Ezekiel 38 and 39, and I'm going to give you the biblical, the geographical, the geopolitical reasons why I think we are in Ezekiel 38. If we are in this condition and the Gog and Magog invasion is coming really soon, that means something's going to happen to America in the very near future, is what that would imply. So let's talk about the future of the greater and safer Israel. How do we know that that's coming, that there's going to be a greater or safer Israel? Well, let's look at the prophetic evidences and see if we can come up with that conclusion. Ezekiel 38 and 39, many of you are somewhat familiar with it. The Gog of Magog invasion is another name for it. You see a map of the general participants. You've got their modern day names off to the left. We think it would include Russia, They'd sort of be the leader of it. The southern steps, southern steps of Russia, some of the breakaway countries of the Soviet Union. You got Turkey, Iran, and you see the list up there, and you see that they're all, I call them an outer circle, they're outer ring. They're not sharing common borders with Israel. Now, none of these countries have ever been Israel's ancient or notorious enemies except Iran at the time of Esther, which would have been Persia back then. But they're going to come against Israel. And this is the event God is going to uphold his holy name in, and that's going to happen when Israel is in certain conditions. And when that Israel is, and you'll see I call them the outer ring, show you that image to compare. Sometimes these maps are important, and you see that the inner circle where the Israel flag is, it would be where the Psalm 83 countries are. Now, Russia's got to bring its hordes through those lands, and it says they're going to come down from the uttermost parts of the north, but they don't share common borders with Israel. Now, when is this going to happen? Well, Ezekiel's very descriptive. It's going to happen in the latter years when Israel is being regathered from the nations. In other words, there will be an Israel brought back from the sword, the persecution, into a land which had long been desolate. Okay? And I think we can give ourselves some check marks there because that has been going on for the past 67 years and it is still going on. Do you agree with me? Okay. Now, what about these other very important details? Is Israel dwelling in the midst of the land, the very center of the land? And what land is he talking about? And I'll show you that in a minute. Are they dwelling securely without walls, bars, nor gates, having gold and silver and acquired livestock and goods, a very wealthy nation, possessing booty and great plunder? Because that is what's enticing Russia to coalesce with its belligerents and come against Israel. These are the descriptions we have in Ezekiel 38, verses 7 through 12. Is Israel dwelling without walls, bars, or gates? Well, I'd say if you looked at that literally, you'd have to say no. They've got a 403-mile wall, which is at various points is 20 feet high, filled with concrete, that was established to keep Palestinian terror out of Israel proper. So they're not dwelling without walls, bars, nor gates. Matter of fact, the Middle East is the most fenced-in and fortified region in the entire world, and inside of that, you'll see the map there, Israel is the most fenced-in country in the entire Middle East, and to be honest with you, it's probably the most fenced-in country in the entire world. So it'd be very difficult to say they're living in security without walls, bars, nor gates. Matter of fact, Israel is so concerned about ISIS right now, they've started to lock arms with terrorist groups in the Sinai beneath Israel there. The Anwar al-Bayat group has aligned with ISIS, that they're going to build, they're worried ISIS is going to move into Jordan. And you see there's a proposed fence to build between Israel and Jordan now, in the southern part of Jordan, which is where an entrance is if you want to be a tourist and get into Petra. Has anyone ever been to Petra before? I'll be talking about that in a minute or two. Was there recently. So I don't think they're dwelling without walls, bars, nor gates. I am a literalist when it comes to Bible prophecy, but I think the more conclusive issue is they're not dwelling safely. The Hebrew words he uses is that we dwelling securely, or yeshag v'taf, and they mean to dwell securely, not because you give up land for peace and compromise your borders, but because you conquered your enemy, and now you're not really worried about them, right? And so I don't think Israel's dwelling securely presently because they're surrounded by 100,000 missiles by Hezbollah. ISIS is barreling down, got their eyes on Jordan. The list goes on. Iran's working on a nuclear scenario. So Ezekiel tells us 10 chapters earlier when Israel will dwell in that yeshag v'tach, that's safely, that dwelling securely condition. And he says in Ezekiel 28, verses 24 through 26, thus says the Lord God, when I have gathered the house of Israel from the peoples among whom they are scattered and hallowed in them in the sight of the Gentiles, then they will dwell in their own land, which I gave to my servant Jacob, and they will dwell there safely, the same Hebrew words, yeshag v'tach. They'll build houses and plant vineyards. Yes, they will dwell securely, yeshag v'tach. Now when? Is it when Barack Obama gets them to trade land to the Palestinians? No, it says they will dwell securely when I execute judgments on all those around them, circumspect around Israel, sharing common borders. Then they shall know that I'm the Lord, their God. Okay? So does Israel have enemies around them that despise them? Well, they do. And you see a map of them up there, and they happen to be in Psalm 83. Now, none of these were listed in Ezekiel 38, entirely different population. Now, these countries, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iraq, they voted against there ever being in Israel in 1947 when the United Nations legislated the reestablishment of Israel. They voted against them. They went to war against them when they became a nation in 1948. You remember the War of Independence. They fought again in 1967 and in 1973, some of these belligerents. And they realized that, terrorism was another alternative route. So you've got terrorist populations that have developed in there. Hezbollah, I believe the Palestinians are a central theme of this prophecy. I'll share that with you in a moment. You've got, these Hamas is in there, the Muslim Brotherhood's down in Egypt. None of these entities recognize Israel's right to exist. And I think you got to throw in ISIS now. And if ISIS goes unchecked, the JV, Obama's JV team, if you've ever, he thought they were a junior varsity team. But I think he's taking things a lot more serious now. I know Israel is. Israel is very concerned about them right now. If they go unchecked, they may very well be in Psalm 83. And I'm going to show you where that may be. Now, it's important to note, when I put that map up there, this is who Asaph, who wrote the Psalm 3,000 years ago, identified these people by, because he didn't have in his vocabulary Edomites and Ammonites and termites and gigabytes and things like that. He had Edomites in his vocabulary. He didn't have Jordan and things like that, Hezbollah. But he says in the very beginning of verse 6, as he tells us who's involved in this confederacy, the tents of Edom are involved. And then he goes through the Ishmaelites and the other names. And he talks about this group of people in a habitation condition, in a tent dwelling condition, which biblically would mean military encampments or more usually refugee conditions. So I think he's alerting us that there's going to be Edomite descendants at some point in time that are going to be refugees. Okay, and I'll show you who they are in just a moment. But I also want you to realize down below in yellow, it says Assyria is involved. And they're involved in a very specific fashion. They've joined with the children of Lot, and they're helping the children of Lot, which is Jordan today. Moab and Ammon also listed in there. So they've got a specific role. They're going to join with Jordan, and they're going to help them. And I'll explain why that might be significant with ISIS in just a moment. And we're told in verse 12 that their motive, unlike Russia's, which is to take plunder and booty, is to take for themselves the pastures of God for a possession. They want to take over Israel. Now, these refugees have became a reality in 1948, 1949. Here's a picture of them. The Palestinians have Edomite representation ethnically inside of them. Now, not all Palestinians have Edomite descent, but they are, I traced this in my Psalm 83 book, their descent, and we can clearly see that there are some Edomites in the Palestinian refugees. So I think Asaph was warning us that when you see the Edomites in refugee conditions, in this case, in modern day equivalents, you're looking at the Palestinians, and it is their plight. They want another state, right? That's why they want land for peace and all that sort of thing. That's who they were, that's who they are today. They're no longer throwing stones at Israel, they're lobbing missiles. So in a nutshell, because I know many of you are very familiar with Psalm 83, you see on the right side of the screen, here's who's involved: Lebanon, Hezbollah, Syria, etc. More than likely, these are the belligerents. And their goal, I didn't read it to you, but here it is in Psalm 83, verse 4. They're going to form a confederacy, and they're going to form a plan to hurt Israel. And their goal is, they have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more. So they don't want there to be an Israel, right? So if it's for today, here's what they want to do. They don't want peace with the Jews. They want peace without the Jews. They want to take over that land, and they want to fly the flag of Palestine over it, so they have another Arab state. I sincerely think that's what Asaph was trying to tell us. So that's my personal interpretation of that prophecy. Now, they want to destroy the nation of Israel, that the name of Israel can be remembered no more. But yet we're marching towards this period of time when God is going to uphold his holy name through Israel. So if they want to wipe Israel off the map, that's going to be a problem for God, right? I mean, he's going to look kind of foolish, right? I'm sorry there's no Israel. I screwed up, guys. You're not really saved. So Psalm 83 book is out there, and that's the best-selling book in the history of prophecy in the news, apparently, over 30 years. And if you want to see how it would play out in your lifetime, I've written a novel called Revelation Road. What happens to a family when Isaiah 17, Psalm 83, and Ezekiel 38 happen? And so that's available. We've got a limited supply out there if you want to see how it could apply in a real life. scenario. So now let's look at Israel today. Israel is going to be moving into a greater and safer position because we see they're going to be safer according to Ezekiel 38. When they're dwelling safely, God is going to uphold his holy name through the Magog invasion. But we know that until Psalm 83 happens, if I'm correct, they're not going to dwell safely because judgments have to be executed upon those around them that despise them, and then they'll dwell securely, okay? So this is where I'm going with these thoughts. And presently, Israel today is about the size of New Jersey, about 8,000 square miles. Get a picture of this, but realize that that's about to change in my estimation. They're going to probably be redrawing the atlases pretty soon, like they did in the 20th century after World War I, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed. So you got the West Bank there, and you got the Gaza. Now, what the brilliant idea of the international community in the Obama scenario is they want Israel to give up land for peace. Matter of fact, they want them to give up those territories there, the Golan Heights, the Gaza over there, and the West Bank, and we call it Judea and Samaria. These are territories that Israel took in the War of 1967, and they've helped Israel increase its defensibility with its borders. And Benjamin Netanyahu has said, well, that's just not going to happen because their borders would become indefensible. So this trading land for peace, folks, by the way, it's not biblically endorsed, and I'll show you why it hasn't worked and why it's not going to work. So that's little tiny Israel today. Now someday, God's going to make good on a promise he made 4,000 years ago to Abraham in Genesis 15:18, where he said, to your descendants I have given this land from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. What you see there, I've got kind of a circle around it, sort of representative of that inner circle if you saw in the Psalm 83 map. And we would call that the promised land, right? And at no time has Israel ever thoroughly possessed all that, but that is the land we're speaking about there. Technically, someday Israel's going to get all that land. Now, this is little Israel right now, but someday, and I think when Messiah returns, they're going to get it all. Israel's going to expand into this promised land, and it'll be approximately, we don't know for sure, the exact borders, but it'll be about 36 Israels of today will fit into this area. Okay? Now, John Kerry, of course, is going to try to stop that, and Obama, they're going to try to pound it down. Hey, by the way, this is really on my heart, and I've shared it a lot of times I've been speaking lately. I talked to you about that Elam prophecy, and I said God's going to be angry with Iran, right? That was part of the prophecy, and God has never been as angry, in my estimation, when you understand the details of this prophecy, at Iran as he has right now. And I believe that is that prophecy for today, that he is furious with Iran. Obama and thinks they put together this wonderful nuclear deal with Iran. Benjamin Netanyahu says it's the worst deal imaginable, and God, I believe, agrees with that. God is furious, and the steam's coming out of his nostrils. And anybody that's going to try to hurt Israel, get in the way right now, any nation or world leader, in my estimation, is getting in the way of God's charge, and they're going to be in serious trouble, folks. And remember, leaders drag down countries and the people in those countries. Another look at that promised land. Some of you may have heard the word the Levant. It's been fairly popularized by that terrorist group called ISIL. There's another look at the Levant, the promised land. That's what ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, has got their eyes on. And that's why they call themselves, and this is what Obama likes to call them too, the Islamic State in the Levant, which happens to be the inner circle of all the Psalm 83 countries. And they're trying to move forward with an Islamic caliphate. And we're shooting little missiles at them, but we're not winning that war, folks. Now let's talk about ISIS for a minute. When Asaph wrote the Psalm 3,000 years ago, he talked about Assyria. Remember I said Assyria joins with the children of Lot and helps them. Now Assyria at that time, 3,000 years ago, looked much like this in the shaded area. It encompassed northern Syria and northern Iraq. Now, when Isaiah wrote, about 300 years later, Assyria also encompassed what is rest of Syria there you see on the map, in that green area, their shaded green area. Because they conquered Syria, it used to be called Aram, in 732 BC, and they took over the area, but not when Asaph wrote. And Damascus, by the way, is not in this Assyrian area here. Damascus is down south. So interesting, isn't it? Because when you look at a map today of the advances ISIS has taken, it's the exact same territory. Okay? So they've moved into those territories which most resemble ancient Assyria on the map. Now it says that they, and by the way, you know, some of the reasons they've taken over that territory, ISIS, is because they had sympathizers, Sunni sympathizers inside of Syria and Iraq that made it relatively easy for them to move in and establish their dominion over there. And they've got the same thing going on in Jordan. They've got a lot of sympathizers over there, and believe me, they've got their eye on Jordan. And that's why King Abdullah II has been over to see Barack Obama 3 times in the last 15 months because he's concerned about ISIS, and he's concerned about the Palestinian peace talks because about 50 to 60% of the population inside of Jordan are Palestinians, and they don't have civil liberties that they'd like, and they want a state of their own, or they want the civil liberties, or whatever. They're a problem for him. They're not real pleased with him. Now, King Abdullah II is from the Hashemite kingdom. He would be from like the house of Saud. He would be like the Ishmaelites. He would not be from the Edomites, the Ammonites, or the Moabites. Just so you follow some of the history there. Now remember, it said Assyria has joined with them, and they have helped them, Jordan, the children of Lot. So, is it possible that ISIS will continue to spread? Terrorist organizations are already joining with them. Jabhat al-Nusra inside of Syria, an offshoot of al-Qaeda. Anwar al-Bayad in the Sinai have aligned with them because they're seeing an opportunity to be part of a Sunni caliphate and rule the Middle East. Okay? Versus Iran, which is Shiite, these are Sunnis. Hamas is already talking to them in the Gaza. So if they take over Jordan, which is a possibility, folks, they've got sympathizers in there, now they have de facto control over the Temple Mount because King Abdullah of Jordan, through the Waqf, W-A-Q-F, has de facto control of the Temple Mount. Will Israel allow that? I don't think so, but just keep that in mind. Jerusalem is the third holiest city in Islam, behind Mecca and Medina. Listed over 70 different times, 1,000 different names, 70 different names, 1,000 times, excuse me, in the Bible, but it's not listed once in the Quran. Inner Circle, the Levant, ISIS, Psalm 83 verses. Now, so here's what I'm going to tell you. I think Israel's going to get all the land in the Levant when Jesus returns. But I think, I'm going to show you some scriptures that substantiate it, they're going to get some of the land incrementally between now and then. Like they got some of the land in 1967. They tripled their size. When they win wars, they take land. It increases the defensibility of their borders. So let's look at this greater, safer Israel. We know they're going to be safer because they're going to dwell securely when Russia comes after them. At least for a while, they'll dwell securely. And why that's going to be a disaster for Islam. Well, the Israeli Defense Forces, folks, are listed in Bible prophecy in several places. I'm going to show you a few of them. Here's one of them, Ezekiel 37:10. Ezekiel had this dry bones vision about 2,600 years ago, and it pictured the Jews out in the nations of the world in a very dry, desperate condition where they were saying, our hope is lost, our bones are dry, and we ourselves are cut off. And God says to Ezekiel, can these bones live? And Ezekiel says, well, you know. And then we find out in verse 10 they can not only live, but they can fight. Because he says he says they're going to stand on their feet. And he said, I prophesied, and he commanded, and breath came into them, and they lived and stood upon their feet, an exceedingly great army. Now, you know, Israel is the most powerful army in the Middle East right now. They've got nuclear weapons. That's their worst kept secret. Now, when Israel wins wars, they take land. This is their history. No reason to think it won't continue to be their plan. Joshua did it between 1406 and 1375 BC when they went into the land of Canaan, the land of milk and honey, and he distributed the 12 tribes in Joshua chapter 13 through 21. King David and King Solomon did it. After that, they actually took over more land and went all the way up to the river Euphrates. Remember, they know that their God gave them that land through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, so they feel justified in taking that land, and it increases the defensibility of their borders. Well, you know, of course, Israel was conquered by Rome in 70 AD. The temple was destroyed, and the city was destroyed, so now we have Israel again. Well, okay, what about those tents of Edom? Here's a really tough prophecy that they need to know about. When they come against Israel in a war, when God executes judgments upon them that despise them, that are around them, it says, the house of Jacob shall be a fire. Read that as the Israeli Defense Forces. The house of Joseph a flame. That is also the Israeli Defense Forces. But the house of Esau, that would be the Palestinians in modern day concerns, shall be stubble. And no survivor, let me repeat that, no survivor shall remain of the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken. Are they going to get a state? I don't think so. Another parallel prophecy to that in Ezekiel 25, verses 13 through 14. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, I will also stretch out my hand against Edom. Remember, it's the tents of Edom. I will cut off man and beast from it. I will make it desolate from Timon, which is in Edom, which was southern Jordan once upon a time. And Dedan, which is Saudi Arabia, shall fall by the sword. I will lay my vengeance on Edom by the hand of my people Israel, the Israeli Defense Forces, and that they may do in Edom according to my anger and according to my fury, that they shall know my vengeance, says the Lord God. If you have any Palestinian friends, tell them to come to know Jesus Christ as soon as possible. Let's talk about some more annexation of territory that we've got some pretty good descriptions on in Obadiah. Remember, Obadiah 1:18 I read is the house of Joseph will be a fire, the house of Jacob a flame, and vice versa, and Esau will be stubble. Well, the next verse, Obadiah says this, Israel will annex, verses 19 and 20, southern Jordan, the Gaza, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. You can read it yourself. I've got it in my books, but that's what he's saying. And they're going to also get up into southern Lebanon, which is Zarephath in the prophecy. So Israel's going to move over and expand out and reach up a little bit if this prophecy is going to happen in the near future. I put this prophecy with Psalm 83. Israel's going to move into that area, spread a little bit into the Levant. Now, there are people who don't agree with me, okay, so don't take my word for it. Be a Berean, Acts 17:11. Search the scriptures to see if what I'm telling you is true. What about Jordan? Concerned about ISIS. Well, we got some prophecy about them too. Therefore, behold, the days are coming in Jeremiah 49, verse 2. Says the Lord, that I will cause to be heard an alarm of war in Jordan. In Rabbah of the Ammonites, which is around Amman, Jordan, the capital of Jordan. And guess what, folks? It's going to become a desolate mound. And her villages shall be burned. And then does it say ISIS will take possession of its inheritance? Oh, it says Israel shall take possession of his inheritance. Meaning, Israel's the one in victory here, because Israel wouldn't take possession of Jordan, or at least this area, if somebody else was victorious. If ISIS was victorious, they certainly wouldn't want Israel moving in, right? It doesn't mean ISIS won't go in there first, which I think is a very great possibility, and become a very catalyst for Psalm 83. It's going to be a desolate mound. I told you in Isaiah 17 that that's going to be a desolate mound too. It's going to be a ruinous heap, reduced to rubble. It's going to be a city that never exists anymore. Basically, Amman, Jordan, in relationship to Damascus, if you're familiar with the West Coast, is San Diego to Los Angeles distance, roughly. I mean, it's not that far away. You know, it's all pretty much consolidated over there in the Levant. It's interesting when you look at Jordan. If Israel takes possession of Jordan, how much of Jordan? And do we have more clues about that? You know, in Ezekiel 38 and Ezekiel 39, when God wins that war, we have these details that Israel is going to gain renown in the aftermath after God wins the war for them, because they're going to be burying the dead for 7 months and converting the fuel or burning the weapons for 7 years, and the world is going to take notice of that. It says they'll gain renown. But we're told they're going to be burying these hordes of Gog, the dead soldiers, Iranians and all this stuff, in this valley. We're told that there's, so much descriptions. And it will come to pass in that day, after the victory, that I will give Gog a burial place there in Israel, the valley of those who pass by the east of the sea, and it will obstruct travelers, because there they will bury Gog and all his multitude. There's going to be lots of these guys, lots of hordes of Gog. Therefore they will call it the valley of Ham Gog, which means hordes of Gog, dead corpses. They'll be burying them for 7 months. The house of Israel will be burying them in order to cleanse the land from the contamination and whatnot. So they're going to bury them in a valley east of some sea. Okay? So let's look at our options there. There's the Mediterranean Sea, but there's no real conducive valleys inside of what we know as Israel today. And I don't think they're going to want to be burying a bunch of contaminated corpses in Tel Aviv. So I don't think the Mediterranean is the best choice. There's the Sea of Galilee, but that's in Syria, not prime valleys there, to bury that many people. It may be a possibility, but I don't think so. Plus, it's under Syrian control right now. You got the Red Sea, but that would be a logistical nightmare to take all these hordes of God coming down from the north, moving them down. Plus, you have the Scirocco winds, which come out of through the Mediterranean, through Africa, and they have hurricane forces at some point. They could carry contamination on in. These are just my thoughts as I'm speculating, but you also have the Dead Sea. And to the east of that Dead Sea is a perfect place to bury all these guys. That's central Jordan. It is just filled with valleys, useless nothing. Be a great place to just get them over. Just saying, maybe that's another allusion to the fact that Israel is going to move into Jordan. And maybe that's where the Valley of Hamon-Gog will be. It's a place that doesn't even exist yet, but it will exist according to Ezekiel 39. Now it's interesting in that area, we had a prophecy that Jesus gave in Matthew 24, verse 15. And he said, when you see abomination of desolation, spoken by Daniel the prophet, this is when the Antichrist, in the middle of the tribulation, goes into the tribulation temple, goes into it, and he exalts himself above everything that's called or worshipped as God. He declares himself to be God. And Jesus says, when you see that, spoken by Daniel, and this guy is standing in the holy place, in the temple, whoever reads it, let him understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. And it's most commonly understood, and I'll show you a scripture that supports it, the mountains he's referring to are the mountains in southern Jordan, ancient Bozrah in the Hebrew, Petra in the Greek. It's a tourist place to go right now. So he's telling this faithful remnant, whoever's going to pay attention to him, to flee the area and go here, and I'll show you Petra's a perfect place to go. Now, that advice right now, if this was to happen right now, is absolutely ludicrous advice for a Savior to give to the Jewish people, because the Jordanians would not let them go over there right now. Okay? But if they have control over Jordan, it's the best possible advice you can imagine, because it's the safest place they could go. Just saying. Petra. It's a tourist place right now. I was there not too long ago with my friend, Lynn. You see us there on camels. Do me a favor, especially if you're a little older like me, don't ride a camel. I'm telling you. I thought I was going to die. You're sitting on these little serape things, and that's what they call a saddle, and my friend was sitting here like this the whole time. I thought one of us was going to die. Anyway, you can see another picture there, and these are, it's caved fortress cities. They can house all kinds, I don't know, I think several million. I don't know the exact number. There's canalways there. The Nabateans had formed these areas, and they have agricultural and drinking canals, and it would be a perfect place to go, folks. I mean, it's worth going and seeing it, because this is where they're going to go. Because we know in Isaiah 63 it tells us, who is this who comes from Edom? So in other words, the Lord's going to go to rescue the remnant there in Edom with dyed garments from Bozrah, which is Hebrew for Petra. This one is who is glorious in his apparel, traveling in the greatness of his strength. I who speak in righteousness, mighty to save. There's our clue. That's the Messiah, right? For the day of vengeance in my heart, and the year of my redeemed has come. He's going to come for the faithful remnant that's realizing the Antichrist is going to come after and try to kill them all. And Zechariah 13:8 says that 2/3 of the Jews in the land will be cut off by this guy, but 1/3 will escape, and most of them will probably go here. And then they're going to recognize, we're told in Hosea 5:15, Jesus, it says this, that I will go and return to my place. So we know Jesus has come, and now he's returned to the right-hand side of the throne of God. Until they recognize their offense, speaking of the Jewish people, which is generational rejection of the Messiah, Jesus as the Messiah. And in their affliction, they will recognize their offense, or they'll call for him. So, and what they'll say is, Barak haba v'shalom Adonai, which is, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. That's what Jesus said in Matthew 23. I will not return until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And that will be the year of his redeemed, and that's where he'll go to get them. And then he'll march against the Antichrist, and he'll do his victory ascent to the Mount of Olives, etc. Jordan, interesting. More prophecies on Jordan. I have heard the reproach of Moab and the insults of the people of Ammon. Remember, that's Jordan. Ammon is northern Jordan. Moab is central Jordan in modern day. Which they have reproached my people and made arrogant threats against their borders. Okay? So what? The residue of my people shall plunder them, and the remnant of my people shall possess them. That's another argument that Israel's going to plunder them and move in there. This is the alarm of war in Rabbah, and Israel shall take possession of its inheritance. The residue of my people will plunder them, and they'll take possession. It sounds like war, victory, annexation. Okay? That's how I interpret those things. Now, what's interesting is we talk about all these things. These are Muslim countries. Okay? And those confederacies, and they're in Psalm 83, which is predominantly Muslim. Ezekiel 38 is predominantly Muslim. Different countries, except for Russia. But Iran, Turkey, and those other ones are Muslim. So we've got predominantly Muslim wars here, folks. Now, Israel's going to win this one, it looks like, and move in and take some southern Lebanon, move into Jordan. This is my thinking. And what he says in the next verse is not good for Islam. In context of them, Israel taking out Moab and Ammon, here's what he says. This they, Moab and Ammon, shall have for their pride, because they have reproached and made arrogant threats against the people, the Israelis, of the Lord of hosts. The Lord will be awesome to them, for he will reduce to nothing all the gods of the earth. People shall worship him, each one from his place, indeed all the shores of the nations. Now, at the time Zephaniah wrote, there was no Allah. Okay? There was primary god of the Ammonites was Milcom, and the primary god of the Moabites was Chemosh. But in the 7th century, when Muhammad comes along and takes those over 360 somewhat gods or whatever they had, and got everybody to buy into that polytheism, into this thought of monotheism of the moon god, Allah, now this is who we would be referring to as being famished as a result of what's going to happen to Moab and Ammon. It looks like it might slap Allah and help, and it might be him losing part of his Akbar. Now, I'm putting this event in with Psalm 83, just so you know where I'm compartmentalizing these things, okay? And I'm putting Psalm 83 real soon, right? Because if Ezekiel 38 is coming soon, and Psalm 83 probably has to precede it, you follow what I'm saying. Compacting it into who knows how soon. Psalm 83, in line with what I just said in Zephaniah, it ends with this. Fill their faces, meaning the confederates of Psalm 83, the Arab countries we showed on the map, with shame, that they may seek your name, O Lord, that they may be confounded and dismayed forever. Yes, let them be put to shame and perish. Why? That they may know that you, whose name alone is the Lord, are the most high over all the earth. He wants them to know the one true God. Okay? Do they know the one true God right now, those Arab countries around there, Jehovah, his God, who sent Jesus Christ? Well, some people would like you to think that Allah and Jehovah are the same God, but they're not, right? The Quran's got some surahs, and one of them says in 551, O ye who believe, take not Jews and Christians for your friends and protectors. They are friends and protectors to each other. And he among you that turns to them for friendship is of them. Verily Allah guideth not an unjust people. So if God is Allah, if Jehovah is Allah, then I guess Jehovah doesn't like Jews or Christians. But, you know, you can't, if you're a Jew or a Christian, you're not going to get into Mecca in Saudi Arabia. They won't let you in. Matter of fact, your life could be threatened. Now, it seems like they're going to make friends with Israel and let them have a little airspace to fly over northern Saudi Arabia to strike Iran, because they don't like Iran. They won't let any Jews come into Mecca, but they can go take out Iran and do Saudi Arabia's dirty work, because the enemy of my enemy is my friend, temporarily, because they are very worried about Iran. So there's this movement called Chrislam, which is where they're trying to join Islam and Christianity at the hip. Now, I'm telling you right now, this greater Israel is terrible news for this Islam. First of all, don't be fooled by this Chrislam nonsense. Okay? Islam rejects the deity of Christ in Surah 5:17. Islam rejects his death on the cross in Surah 4, and you see them listed up there. It denies the Trinity. And Surah 4:171. So believe in Allah and His apostles. Say not Trinity. Desist, it will be better for you, for Allah is one. Glory be to Him. Far exalted is He above even having a son. Okay? So just be clear, it's not the same. Now, is there going to be a Muslim Antichrist? Okay? This is a paradigm shift in thinking of who the Antichrist is going to be, prompted mainly by some books by Joe Rosenberg and Walid Shubat over the last 10 to 12 years, I think. Many of us don't agree with it at all. Dr. David Reagan, many of you may know who he is. He has Christ and Prophecy TV, been on the show many times. And he wrote a book called The Man of Lawlessness. And in that book, he interviewed a bunch of us, about 20 scholars, about our thoughts on will the Antichrist be a Muslim. Here's a few notable comments. If he is, he will be an apostate one. The Antichrist claims to be God, according to Dr. Mark Hitchcock, Daniel 11:36. Dr. Ronald Fruchtenbaum. No Israel would trust any Muslim to guarantee Israel's security. The Antichrist, Ed Hinson. The Antichrist will not regard the God of his fathers, according to Daniel 11:37. Muslims are committed generation after generation to their belief in Allah. Now remember, this guy's going to go in the temple and declare himself to be above all that's even called God, which by rights, a fatwa would have to be issued against this guy. My comment was, Psalm 83 will be a punch to the gut. Remember, this is Muslim countries in Psalm 83. It looks like the Israeli Defense Forces are going to win. Ezekiel 38 will be an uppercut to their jawbone, because predominantly Muslim countries as well. Pre-trib events, in my estimation. So that in the first half of the tribulation, Islam will probably be knocked out for the 10 count. That's what I suspect. Okay? So you can see I don't agree with the Muslim Antichrist. Daniel 9:26 tells us where he comes from. The people who destroyed the city and the sanctuary, that was Jerusalem and the temple. Now, if you want to, I wrote an article, Does Daniel Debunk the Muslim Antichrist, 4 or 5 years ago. And you can Google search it. It's a great article, and it's got like 145 blog comments with Joel Richardson and me going round and round and round. If you want to really get into it. Now, what about America? Do you guys want to know? I mean, it's probably been an hour. I'm sorry. Yeah, you drove a long way. Why stop now? Where are we in Bible prophecy? I'm going to give you where I think we are. And some people think this as well. J.R. Church thinks this. In Ezekiel 38, we find out that in not only the 9 belligerents in Russia's coalition, and not only Israel being victimized by all that, but there's other populations mentioned. In verse 13, it says, there's Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish and all their young lions. And they will say, have you come, speaking about Russia's hordes to come after the plunder and booty, have you come to take plunder? Have you gathered your army to take booty, to carry away silver and gold, and to take away livestock and goods, to take great plunder? Which is more evidence of what Russia's motive is. Not to take the pastures of God for a possession like Psalm 83, but to take the livelihood and prosperity, the plunder and booty. So, generally speaking, Sheba would be Yemen. Some people say it moves over into the Arab Emirates and stuff. And Dedan would be Saudi Arabia, northern part of Saudi Arabia. But who is Tarshish and their merchants and the young lions, merchants of Tarshish? Well, there's two predominant, as you study this, you're going to find two predominant arguments out there. The first one is, well, one of them is that it's Spain, would be Tarshish. And then the young lions would be the offshoots from there, maybe South America, the Latino countries, and Central America. And that is one of the arguments out there. I have studied it closely. I absolutely disagree. I think it's a terrible argument. If you take a close look at it, you know, you might disagree with me, but email me and we'll get 145 blogs going. The other argument is Tarshish is the UK. And their young lions would be the colonies that came out from the UK. Now, many archaeologists believe that Tarshish was Britain is the name for Tarshish. They believe it was beyond the Gibraltar, which is the strait that separates the Mediterranean Sea from the Atlantic Ocean. Beyond that around would be the UK. And I'm going to give you my arguments for this, biblically and geopolitically, etc., as to why they are and why we're here. But regardless, it does talk about merchants, not athletes or politicians or soldiers, or as someone wants to be doing commerce with Israel that's very robust, dwelling securely without walls, bars, nor gates, because they probably eliminated their Arab foes. And I think that would be UK and us. Okay? Now, J.R. Church, the founder of Prophecy in the News, wrote in his book Guardians of the Grail, an inscription discovered in 1780 on a cliff above Mount Hope Bay in Bristol, Rhode Island, contained an engraving that read, "Voyagers from Tarshish, this stone proclaims." It was believed to be inscribed around 533 BC. Harvard University has found 5 locations within the United States where the merchants of Tarshish had colonies. Harvard University. Okay, interesting. A matter of fact, I'm not sure, but I think this book is being put back into print. Great book, and through Prophecy in the News. You can check with the table out there. Biblically, who are these guys, right? Who is Tarshish? Well, we find out in Genesis 10, verses 4 through 5, that they're the sons of Elisha. There was Tarshish was among them, etc., sons of Javan. But what we find out is that they were the ones who were the isles of the Gentiles. So we find a connection with Tarshish and the isles. And if you look on a map, really the British Isles are pretty much oversized islands. This theme of being in the isles shows up repeatedly in the Bible, in the Psalm 72 and Isaiah, a few places. So there's a clear connection with Tarshish and the isles where they settled. There's more. When Jonah was given instructions to go to Assyria, which really behaved much like ISIS is doing right now, it'd be like if someone came up to one of you and said, "Would you do me a favor and go tell ISIS I'm going to destroy them?" Okay, let's see a show of hands. So he got out of there and went the wrong way. And you know the story, and he headed toward Tarshish. So we find out he headed away from Assyria, and he went westward. So that points toward a directional area of Tarshish being to the west. We also have a psalm that says, "Thou breakest the winds of Tarshish with an east wind." So if it was a west wind, it wouldn't break it, but it's an east wind. So Tarshish is coming somewhere from the west, if we talk about that sort of scenario geographically. We also have another theme about Tarshish. They were known for their vast riches and seaworthy ships. They could be out in the ocean for months upon months, I think even maybe years at a time. And they're mentioned as vast, wealthy merchants 7 times in the Bible, and seaworthy ships 11 times. Okay? So just a little bit about them biblically and geographically. Now let's look at them geopolitically. Remember, we have a group called Tarshish and their young lions dealing in the latter years in Ezekiel 38, right? They're in the latter years saying, "Russia, we want commerce with these guys. When are you coming to take it?" So let's look in the modern day scenario. The Ottoman Empire was collapsed in 1917, and Britain and France took over the area. There's no Spain taking over the area, just so you see if they're on the map. But so Tarshish took over, or Britain took over Iraq, what is now Jordan and Jerusalem, and you see France took over Lebanon and Syria. So it's interesting that you don't see any Spain in there. And of course, these Arab states got their statehood sequentially, and so Britain and France relinquished their control of the area, and that's why we have the Middle East the way it is right now on a map. But you don't see any Spain there. Spain's recovering a little bit economically, but it was a couple years ago, the International Monetary Fund said they were about to go bankrupt. But I personally just think, from a modern perspective, you don't see Spain in any of this so far. But what about America? America's been heavily involved in the Middle East. You see that Jimmy Carter was confirmed a covenant with Anwar Sadat of Egypt and Menachem Begin of Israel in 1979. And you see Bill Clinton with Jordan and Israel's treaty in 1994. You don't see any Spain presidents in this situation, right? Just thinking about it, right? Latter years, who are we talking about? The young lions. So what have the young lions been up to? Those Americans. What I've been teaching and I'm about to go through, I have in a DVD out there called America in the Coming Mideast Wars. What is America's role in Psalm 83, Ezekiel 38, etc.? And in the DVD, I talk about our purpose that God created us for. We didn't become a superpower status because of our granddaddy's good looks. And some of you look really handsome in here right now. Safe haven for Jews. That's why we have so many Jews living here, right? About 5 million. A beacon of Christianity to the nations of the world. And who has been the most gospel-sending missionaries country in the church age? It's been America, really, I think, if you looked historically. Instrumental in the rebirth of Israel. Harry S. Truman, president at the time, one of the strongest proponents for the rebirth of Israel in 1947, and to be a supporter of Israel. Okay? God blessed us with inherent resources and great blessings as a Christian country to accomplish these things. But we have to ask ourselves, has money become our God? Has greed become our motivator? Have we kicked out of our God out of our schools, like in 1962 when the Supreme Court ruled that there be no more prayer in public schools, or 1963 when the Supreme Court ruled no more Bible reading in public schools? Looks like we've kicked God out of our schools and out of our culture. Have we legalized abortion? 1973, Roe versus Wade, we've had about 55 million abortions since that time, at the rate of about 1 million per year. Of course, Planned Parenthood doesn't think they're real people. Have we become an immoral nation? Did the Supreme Court strike down DOMA in 2013, which is the Defense of Marriage Act, which means one man should be married to one woman, but we can't defend the constitutionality of that now? It's biblical, right? Did we approve recently in 2015, Supreme Court, same-sex marriages? Okay, these are dangerous biblical boundaries that we have now crossed. When you look historically at countries, nations, empires that have crossed these types of biblical boundaries, one, they've never come back and regressed and digressed back. Two, they've been destroyed. You look at sexual perversion with Sodom and Gomorrah around the time of Abraham. You look at idolatry and child sacrifice with the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BC. It's gone. There's no more northern kingdom of Israel. You look at moral decadence and wickedness with the Syrian Empire, destroyed in 612 BC. The other one, a real big one, a boundary that we're crossing right now, which is really bad. Have we turned our back against Israel? God will curse those that curses Israel, and he'll bless those that bless Israel. Pharaoh tried to curse Israel, and you know what his fate was at the Red Sea. Hitler's gone, okay? So are we turning our back against Israel? Let's look at the evidence. We've been trying to get Israel to give up land for peace, haven't we? Not just Obama, but Bill Clinton tried to do it with Yasser Arafat back at the Camp David Summit. Didn't work, did it? George Bush tried to do it with his roadmap plan. Didn't work, right? After him. Barack Obama's trying to do it with adopting the Saudi Peace Initiative, which is the worst deal ever because it's initiated by the Arabs. It's a land for peace deal. Give back the land that you acquired in 67, recede your borders, give up East Jerusalem as the capital of the Palestinian state, and let all those millions of displaced Palestinian refugees come back into Israel proper because they want to call it Palestine. They really were trying to force this down Benjamin Netanyahu's throat when John Kerry replaced Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. And it all collapsed in April of 2014. Why? Because, folks, it's not going to work. We're gone way too far for this stuff. So what's been happening during that time in America with the young lions, if that's us? Have we been getting remedial judgments, warnings like God would do to a country when he's trying to tell them you're blowing it? Have we been getting prophetic voices sounding the alarm? Have we been given the leadership that we deserve? These are the things that character the judgment and destruction of a country historically. Well, let's see. Remedial judgments. It looks like our hedge of protection came down on September 11th of 2001, after which point we engaged in all these different Middle East wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya we were involved in, ISIS now. We've had natural disasters, economic upheavals. We've had our worst natural disaster in our nation's history, and Hurricane Katrina, Category 5, followed by Hurricane Rita, Category 5, the next month. We had our worst, deadliest tornado seasons in 2011, I believe that was. You saw the headline, 3 days, 14 states, 241 tornadoes just ravaged through that area there in the United States, leaving destruction in its wake. We've had the mortgage meltdown in 2007. We had the economic crisis, which Jonathan Kahn talks about, the global economic crisis at the Shemitah time of 2008. We've had the worst oil spill in our nation's history in 2010, the BP oil spill. And now we have to ask ourselves, is there anywhere safe anymore or sacred? Sandy Hook Elementary in Newtown, Connecticut, you know those first graders that were killed there. Newtown, Connecticut was dubbed as the safest town in America up until that time. And then in April of 2013, we had terror inside of our country again, with the Boston Massacre. Prophetic voices. Jonathan Kahn wrote the book The Harbinger, bestseller. Now he's written a book called The Shemitah. I think he's a prophetic voice. Dr. David Reagan has a magazine called The Lamplighter, and about a year and a half or so back, you see on the title there, Jonathan Kahn, an end-time prophet to America. Now, if you know Dr. David Reagan, it would be easier to get sainthood from the Pope than to have Dr. David Reagan call someone an end-times prophet. But he believed he is one. I do too. I've spent many evenings and conferences with Jonathan. But he's not alone. Joe Rosenberg wrote a book called Implosion. Mark Hitchcock wrote a book called The Late Great United States, and Terry James wrote a book called The American Apocalypse. And look at these titles. It's not sugar and spice and everything nice, you know, imploding as a country and apocalypse and late great. I've read these books. I've had the opportunity to share platforms with many of these guys, and they come up. I've got some good news and some bad news. The good news, they all basically agree with each other. The bad news is you're not going to like what they're saying. That it's not good news for America, that America is under judgment right now. I had the opportunity to share a platform with Hal Lindsey, who wrote The Late Great Planet Earth. Many of you may know who he is. Many of you might have been saved by that book. People still are. A hand went up right there. And we spoke in Dallas in January of 2013, and Barack Obama had been reelected. And here's what Hal said. The Lord has one purpose for President Barack Obama, and that is to destroy this country. And he said forcefully, I'm telling you that this country is gone, folks. And he threw his hand down to the right side. I remember it vividly. I was sitting right in front of him. I'm not saying this going, but it is already gone, folks. That's what he said. Prophetic voice. Do we have the leaders we deserve? I'm not trying to bash Obama. He's proud of what I'm about to say. He immediately came into the office and he repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell in the military. Shortly after that, the Attorney General, Eric Holder, said we can no longer defend the constitutionality of DOMA, which paved the way for the Supreme Court to just knock it down in 2013, even though it's biblical. Barack Obama came out and said same-sex marriage, he approved of same-sex marriages, and of course the Supreme Court just now adjudicated that. So have we been given the remedial judgments? Have we been given the prophetic voice warnings? And have we been given the leaders we deserve? Do you guys know who Jan Markell is? Okay, she's a nationally syndicated radio host, Messianic Jew, been on a radio show a lot called Understanding the Times, and we did a conference together not too long ago, and she said she's highly suspecting that Hillary Clinton will win the next election because we're under a condition of judgment. Now, I hope she's not upset that I said that, but she's not alone in people who think that. But how can something come to America where we're going to find ourselves in Ezekiel 38 as protesters with Tarshish and Sheba and Dedan going, what are you doing, Russia? You're coming for this plunder and booty. What could happen to us? What are some possible scenarios? Well, one on the top of the radar is economic collapse. Some of us are very, very concerned about that. We have been pumping dollars out through the feds, unimaginably. And, there's many countries that are trying to come up with their own currencies and get rid of the petrodollar. External nuclear attack. What about an EMP, electromagnetic pulse? You know, on July 4th, 2 Russian nuclear jets flew 40 miles off the coast of California. And while Putin was getting hold of Obama to let him know Happy Independence Day, they were shortwave radioing people saying, look, Happy Independence Day. Driving right by. Electromagnetic pulse is a nuclear weapon. And it depends on where its burst altitude. If you burst it up at 180 miles in the air, it spreads out like a canopy at the speed of light and fries everything electronic underneath it. And it would be, in some cases, irreparable damage or take a long time for this country to recover. Very plausible scenario. Internal terrorist attacks, you know, well, we saw, you know, we've seen them. What about if we had a bunch of terrorists? And by the way, the FBI Director James Comey has said we are concerned about ISIS in all 50 states right now. He said that about a month ago. What if we had a bunch of terrorists infect themselves with deadly plagues and go into major cities and infect them, and before we know what to do, those cities are on quarantine? Or if we saw a dirty bomb go off in Dodger Stadium. These things are possible, folks. Internal rot. What about the rapture? What about it? If God took all the believers out of America, what would that do to America? So the rapture timing, could it be in this gap between 2015 and the Gog of Magog invasion? I have various reasons I put out in my books as to why it's very possible, and I'm not date setting from a church thing perspective. I believe it's an imminent event. We could be raptured at any time. I'm doing my rapture exercises fairly frequently. But we don't have to be here for Ezekiel 38, because this is about God upholding his holy name through his people Israel, not the church, right? He's going to prove that the unconditional covenant in Ezekiel 38 that he made through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that he would have a chosen people in a promised land forever, he's going to prove he's going to keep his promise. And we need him to do that because we believe in eternal security in our salvation through our faith. It's a gift of God through grace, not of works, lest any of us should boast. So if he breaks his promises to Israel, I'm jumping ship because I'm a total sinner. I used to be. I'm not perfect. Ask my wife. So we shall be saved from the wrath, folks. I don't believe we're going to go through the tribulation. Through Christ, who delivers us from this wrath, according to 1 Thessalonians. Because he didn't appoint us to the wrath that's going to come upon a Christ-rejecting humanity. And we are going to be kept from the hour of trial that's going to come upon the whole world, we're told in Revelation 3. And that therefore, I'm going to say to you, be comforted by these words. Because he's not going to, in my estimation, he's not going to come and get you during the worst 7-year period on the earth's history during the tribulation, when you are hating life and your eyes are black and your arms are broken and you're fighting for your life. I just don't think that makes any sense, and there's many other reasons why I believe that. And in my Revelation Road book, I spell them out. Now, here are some people. I'm going to try to play a video, hopefully it'll work, who are rapture ready.
当我看到这本书，我就看到了那些帮助我们的弟兄姊妹们，他们的血和力带回来的。这是我们教会这个时候最需要的，真是我们最需要的书。
They got a Bible. They're excited. Do you guys have a Bible at home? Give it a kiss. So they realized the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we should realize that too. And he's going to come and get us real soon. But we could be here for the things I'm talking about, some of them. and they could adversely affect us. You know, they are killing Christians in the Middle East right now. But God's over there. He's reaching out to those Muslims that are disenchanted with Islam through dreams, miracles, visions, and healings. And he's making a huge dent. Many are coming to him. So my words of encouragement to you in these redeem the time, get ready for Christ's return, and let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father. Thank you very much, and get home safe.